So a little bit of background on Switch Automation. We are a hardware agnostic platform that integrates all types of data, including those from proprietary systems. So think of some of those controllers that you may have in your portfolio that are proprietary systems. And that means that we're not deploying any hardware, but we're working with already what's in place. There's obviously exceptions to that, like analog controllers, but what we're really good at is getting data out of anything digital. We bring that into one centralized user interface where operational stakeholders can use fault detection and diagnostics to pinpoint problems at individual stores, across regions, and most importantly, at the portfolio level. The results pay out in many different ways, but every project delivers significant energy savings as we have the ability to identify blind spots in EMSs and local controllers. And the typical payback for the projects that we're doing are on average around 1.5 years, with a lot of projects falling under that year marker. Many of our multi-site customers are seeing a reduction in technician visits as we enable centralized teams to diagnose problems and either make technician visits more effective, honing in on the root cause immediately, or pushing that would-be emergency technician visit to a more routine visit when they go to the site. Takeaway here is data is very powerful, and when harnessed correctly, can be a huge asset for your organization. As we say around here, the ROI lives in the data. The grocery industry is rapidly changing with new players in the market, and it's what seems like an arms race to get the finger on the pulse of how consumers will be shopping for groceries in the next 2, 3, 5 years. There's a lot of attention being focused on consumer engagement and personalization to keep people coming back through the doors. But what's less fashionable to talk about now, but can also give you a leg up on the competition, is how your stores are running in the background. It's no secret that margins are tight within grocery, and the recent pressure, acquisitions and mergers making big headlines these days, are making things even more uncomfortable right now. Everything from suppliers to operations are being challenged internally to deliver more for less. I'll share a statistic in a little bit that leads to this, but generating savings can lead to, again, a leg up on your competition. That being said, our agenda moving forward will be to talk about the world today and the systems operating in siloed, separate fashions to one that operate in a cohesive, centralized place where intelligent operational decisions can be made. Then we'll talk about a real-world case study from a Fortune 500 grocery retailer. And then we'll talk about the journey towards a connected, smarter portfolio. So what is integrated grocery technology? There are a lot of useful technologies out there in the marketplace, and there have been for some time. Everything from anti-sweat heaters to freezer door alarms to EMS platforms. At the same time, the technology in the built world is in a time of rapid innovation, and there seems to be an endless amount of IoT sensors and devices hitting the market, which seems like daily. Just a word of caution, the biggest single factor preventing cohesiveness across portfolios for what we're making the case for today is that all these platforms and sensors, not all of them, but a lot of them, are closed protocol systems. Humidification sensors have the potential to provide a ton of savings, but when they can't talk back to your EMS platform, then there's always going to be a gap with everything else that's going on. Therefore, integrated grocery technology is one that has an open architecture and allows for data to come in and out fluidly from many types of systems. A technology that is configurable for many types of stakeholders and that provides meaningful, actionable insights into live operations and overall portfolio intelligence. All right, so I've talked a little bit about the current state of multi-site grocery retail. Lots of sensors and systems, but not a lot of coordination in the data flow. The questions I want you to think about as we dig just a little bit deeper are, 1, am I able to see all my store's operations in real time? 2, can I find and track persistent problems? And when I do, can I identify the root cause and quickly? 3, can I view, analyze, and control my store performance from a single place or from one user interface from anywhere? 4, can I measure cost implications of a problem, a new piece of equipment, or a change that I made? And 5, can I validate repairs that my vendors made? And can I see that they were effective? Or in other terms, can I do measurement and verification on fixes that were made? Now, if you can answer yes to all the above, you're doing an excellent job. If there are some gaps in those questions that I just asked, you most likely can benefit from an integrated grocery technology. Like I mentioned earlier, I had a statistic to put energy savings kind of in perspective here. Energy Star estimates that $1 in energy savings is the equivalent to increasing sales by $59. Now, with grocery topping out at the top of the food sales category in CVEX database, and on average paying $4 a square foot on energy, which is significant. I'm not saying that saving $1 per square foot is easy, but there are definitely ways to drive down energy use, and it starts with the proper devices and controls, and then ends with an optimized integrated facilities platform. Something we've seen at Switch is there aren't many solutions out there specific to grocery. There's a lot of analytics platforms, but specific only to the hardware they come with. Maybe you had deployed some RTUs that have its own control mechanisms, that has a platform so you can see all those control mechanisms of your entire portfolio, but they're specific to those RTUs. They're not inclusive of everything that you possibly have across the portfolio. So grocery has unique needs and needs a tool. So when you boil it down, what are you lacking without not having something in place? 1, fragmented portfolio data. It's very time consuming to manage data in 3 to 4 different systems, and a lot of times from spreadsheets. That's even if you have the luxury to have somebody on your team to do it. Because of the fragmentation in the data sources, it's very difficult to boil down the root cause of what's going on, which then leads to reactive operations in the portfolio, which then leads to wasted capital. So the first engagement here, for those on the webinar with us today, want to ask how many of you experience 1, 2, or even 3 of these scenarios, and you can use that raise hand function in the upper part of your screen to participate. We'll give everybody a minute to do so. Great. Looks like everybody more or less understands these issues and kind of has a problem with them. So now let's talk about how we can fix these. This technology can make your life easier, save you money, and prepare you for the future of grocery. First, like I've been talking a little bit about, this technology is going to bring everything into one place. As rudimental as it sounds, this is massive. Think about a world where you can look at benchmark energy data while simultaneously looking at the compressor cycles in a potential problem story that you just had a tech out to make changes, all in one screen. Or another example, your team receives a call from a store that reports a hot or cold temperature. You log into the platform, verify that the temp is off, then drill into why that is. In a couple of clicks, you arrive at the sensor point at the specific store, looking at real-time data. You see that the compressor in one of your RTUs is missing cycles. Now, in a couple more clicks, you can look at the last week's operations and see that it's been missing cycles for the last couple of days. That would be pretty valuable, right? Or even better, how about you already have an alarm built in to tell you that you and your techs, when that RTU is having irregularities, and you get somebody out there proactively before that call even comes in. Welcome to the future of smart integrated grocery facilities. Great. Now let's talk about a real world example. Everything sounds good in theory, but let's talk about how this is actually being implemented in a Fortune 500 grocery retailer. One that has a global portfolio in over 5,000 locations in the US alone. Because of their size, they have the luxury of having a centralized energy team. But one of the many challenges of a portfolio of this size is it's nearly impossible to standardize systems, and as a result, there's a lot of variation within each store. So in this particular case, they had a lot of legacy hardware with no way to see, analyze, or control building equipment performance or energy consumption from a centralized place. So in this case, they made the decision to install sub-meters at a majority of their stores, with the idea to catch meaningful energy anomalies when they occur. The setup with the sub-meters, they're pushing data into a big data warehouse where then a centralized team, when alerted, work to identify where those spikes occurred. What they were looking for is a better way to leverage the data that they were producing. Again, because of the size of the portfolio, it was impossible to manually go through all of this data, therefore rendering most of it meaningless. So now let's go into more detail about the world that they were living in before implementing the smart integrated platform, and then the world after. So the first opportunity, and again, a theme today is decentralized data. They had this great asset and centralized focused team, yet they didn't have the right tools to be effective at their job. They're putting data into a repository, but had no way to manipulate that data into meaningful alerts or even make comparisons between their stores. They wanted to compare stores and see which ones are performing better or worse than their peers, but without that organized data, that was next to near impossible. Opportunity 2, inefficient building operations. Based purely on profitability and getting an earful of accounting when things went wrong, the energy team knew that there was going to be just a handful, or if not more than a handful, of stores out of whack at any given time. Again, sub-meters were in place, so if they had the direction, they could go after a particular store and then after a specific sub-meter. But that took a lot of time, 3 months to be exact, from the time that accounting raised a flag to the diagnosis of the problem. And they are not alone in this issue. All the grocery customers that we have and that we talk to on a daily basis tend to have some sort of flavor of this issue. The process of utilities hit the books, finance draws a flag, then they go to the energy team and say, hey, we have this issue. The energy team then has to go into the database, track down that store's data, look into all the specific loads, even if they have that data, which in this specific case weren't normalized, then had to work with the store to figure out what had happened. Was it a set point that was changed, not changed back? Were the lights being left on, etc.? And as a result, time was being wasted and inefficiencies in the systems persisted. They had no remote visibility into the light if the lights are being left on or overnight. They had no visibility into the HVAC system if they were being overworked or overridden, being left on. They were running blind, essentially. One point I want to make here is overworked equipment. This is a huge area of opportunity because equipment costs so much money to not only purchase and maintain, that if you're running your equipment down, that it's not only going to impact your maintenance budget, potentially going to put a hole in your capital budgets in the future. Something to keep in mind. And then opportunity number 3, reactive operations. With no real-time visibility on the equipment within the stores, they're at the mercy of the contractors fixing the problem and trusting that they were fixing it the first time around. And even the contractors didn't have cohesive data sets, so they essentially were not fixing the root cause of the problem. Therefore, there were a lot of instances where the problem was fixed but wasn't fully addressed, leading to the tech having to make multiple visits. And in this specific case, on average, a tech visit was costing the customer $1,000 per visit. Again, with no real-time data, they're at the mercy of the contractors making the right fixes the first time around, essentially even leaving them powerless. Now that we've talked about all the areas for opportunities, now let's talk about how they're able to solve these issues. What an integrated facilities platform was able to deliver for this Fortune 500 company is threefold. Centralization, which is fundamental to success. real-time operational visibility, being able to identify the problem now and react immediately. And then cloud control, giving them the power to fix things remotely, preventing them from having to send out a tech for every little thing. Now let's dig a little bit more into those. The solution delivered more effective portfolio intelligence. In this specific project, we're talking about 6 to 12 different sub-meters depending on the store that, again, were already installed. As with most of these projects, they happen in phases. The first phase of this project included 150 stores, with the second phase of this project encompassing around 2,000 stores. The frequency of the data being pushed into the platform is about every 15 minutes. And the two data points that we're talking about coming off these meters are KWs and KWHs. It's important to remember that the more data you can put into or centralize, the more intelligence you can draw from it. And to note, this company is rapidly expanding the program to encompass more granular systems. As a recommendation here, I would be thinking about your Danfoss systems, your Emerson systems, your microthermal systems, lighting controls, HVAC controls, EMS platforms like Parasense, surveillance, and then also even your slow data as well, looking to automate utility data, work order data, even capital budgets, for example. More data equals more opportunities for savings and optimization. Secondly, performance optimization. Now with a system in place to alert the energy team when a meaningful anomaly occurs, and in this case, a meaningful anomaly is when a specific sub-meter reads 15% over a benchmark, and that benchmark in this case is normalized energy data from the prior year. They can now be alerted when these things happen in real time, and the regional stakeholder can dig deeper into the data for answers. Another piece of this puzzle is the intelligence you can draw from historical data. Since you're able to trend data as well as retroactively look at past operations, mechanically focused teams can find optimal operating schedules for systems like HVAC, not only extending the life of the equipment, but creating consistent savings. Having remote control of lighting and even HVAC systems can be valuable as you don't leave it up to chance for set points to be changed back after they've been overridden. In this specific case, changes are often made and not reverted back to or communicated properly to the centralized team. So now with this visibility, the team can be alerted and follow up with the store individually to verify that change or even make the change themselves, as would be the case with lights being left on overnight. The savings are significant in this case, taking all this into account, and significant in terms of $10,000 per store per year. Super meaningful. And lastly, let's talk about operational excellence. How many teams wouldn't want to make their lives easier? One of the great results of a well-executed project is the ability to streamline data, reduce fire drills, and reduce redundancy. The power of everything working in unison goes into a flow like this. An anomaly occurs at store 107 on refrigeration load 2. An alert is generated to the centralized team who are on it. Data is also fed to the responsible refrigeration contractor who knows what load it occurred on, when it occurred, and have all that data in the platform in which they can log into wherever they are. Getting down to root cause analysis quickly. Now, the refrigeration contractor, depending on the severity of the issue, can decide to fix the problem remotely from the platform, add it to the list when they are scheduled to be at that store, or if mission critical, get there immediately. No delays, just action. This is what we define as operational excellence. And in this specific case, it's saving the company $20,000 in avoided technician visits. Now that we've discussed a real world example, it sounds easy, right? Just hit the button and everything works. Wish that was the case, but it's not. If it was that easy, everybody would have done it already. So to arrive at a world where everything is interconnected and optimized is a journey, to say the least. I saw this quote in Food Dive article yesterday and thought it was too good not to share. To be transparent, this article is talking about the data in two regards. from an operational standpoint and from a marketing one. How do we run as lean as possible while being hyper-personalized with our customers? And I'm stating the obvious here, but the future of grocery is changing, and it's changing fast. But the good news is there are platforms and teams out there that are powerful, configurable to fit everybody's needs and to take your portfolio into the age of optimization. So before I turn things over to Aaron, I want to poll our guests today to hear kind of what issues matter the most to them. So of all the conversations we have with multi-site grocery companies, these are what we find to be the most consistent. On the top there, you'll see the ones that our customers and our prospects find to be the most relevant to increasing streamlined operations, sales revenue, customer loyalty, brand differentiation, holding vendors accountable, something we talked about, and performance insights, and then drive down carbon emissions and operating costs. Give everybody a minute here to participate. Great. Looks like reducing operating costs is by far number one, as well as brand differentiation is up there as well, which is interesting and something that we have a lot of conversations around. And that brand differentiation is an interesting one because it can come from a couple different flavors. A lot of times there's pressure from consumers, as there's a lot of transparency from consumers these days on what are the brands that I'm supporting? What do they do to operate as efficiently as possible? And that's something that we can absolutely help our customers with, is getting those energy savings and those operational savings so they can sit there and kind of puff their chests up and saying, hey, we're doing these things. It also comes in the flavor of, signage. There's a customer that we have that wants to be alerted when it signs out because they find it very detrimental to the brand when the signage is out. So that's a really interesting one. And reducing operating costs being number one is absolutely fundamental to what we do. That's where the ROI lives, and that's where we focus a lot of our time and energy. Third looks to be gaining building performance insights. Visibility is everything. Being able to centralize that visibility, like we talked about, enables so many people within the organization to do their job better and to do it faster. So appreciate everybody sharing their top challenges and priorities. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron here, who is responsible for getting projects like this off the ground, like we discussed today, and is going to go through the details of how to do so.
Thank you, Mike.
Of course.
So let's talk a little bit about what a program actually looks like. The first thing I want to point out towards the left hand of this slide is that often there's two components that really matter in a smart building program or connected building program, whatever word you want to use. And usually when we are working with a new company, they will have come to us with a focus on one or the other of these. And we always end up having to remind people that it's actually relatively important to get both where you can to get the full value out of the solution. The real-time building integrations are sort of the more modern, shiny part of these programs, and that's where we're doing physical integrations. You're pulling in data from your systems, like Mike talked about, so that you're actually getting live information. So the things that are most commonly pulled in a smart building program are the EMS or BMS, for the building. Increasingly, people are starting to pull together the refrigeration systems as well. The mark of a good integration platform is one that can communicate or has the integration pathways developed for those refrigeration systems. Obviously, that being like a significant chunk, maybe half in many applications for grocery, half the energy consumption. Power metering, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, has a particularly useful application in the grocery segment. But also to the bottom left of that slide, the portfolio data. Almost always, even if somebody comes to our team looking to do a connected buildings live data integration, we will ask them to get their utility data to us for a variety of reasons, and oftentimes more than that as well. So when Mike mentioned the word slow data earlier, that is often what we're pulling in here in the portfolio data aggregation, and that word slow really just means that it's stuff that's less frequent than a live on-site interval data polling. So the second most valuable category or most common category that we'll pull in is work orders. Just for basic business intelligence purposes, in any multi-site portfolio, whether that's grocery or retail of other varieties, repair and maintenance is a significant cost. It's usually much higher per square foot than in commercial buildings because the portfolio is more far-flung, and the locations can just literally be more costly to get to, and you get a lot of return visits. So work orders can be very valuable for business intelligence. And then budgets and certifications, ratings, things of that nature that matters to sort of the sustainability team oftentimes within an organization. Again, very valuable. Then the goal is going to be to move that data of both types through a formatting and organization process. So this is naming data points out of EMSs and BMSs, tagging all of the data by region or by store type or whatever is relevant to your particular organization, having that in a consistent, standardized manner with the proper metadata applied, and then moving that on into the applications, the application layers of the platform. So that's going into things like analytics, fault detection and diagnostics that'll enable you to do remote retro commissioning of systems. It'll also enable you to do ongoing monitoring-based commissioning so that you can find things as they happen. And then particularly when you focus on energy, you want something that can give you the ability to do weather normalization, benchmarking, statistics, and then to set up any of those interesting virtual calculations you want so that you can index your systems, in a similar way, and to find which buildings are doing good or bad, relatively speaking, on some kind of scale. And then, it's really truly our belief at Switch Automation that the future of this type of enterprise software is delivered through the cloud so that the right people have the access to the same information in a consistent environment, no matter where they may sit in the organization. That's particularly relevant for multi-site retail portfolios like in the grocery segment. So to talk a little bit more specifically then about what the projects look like on that. Advance the slide. Okay. So, any given program is going to kick off with a strategy phase. Oftentimes by the time a company like Switch is involved, they may have already run through the program strategy with a consultant or an internal steering committee. That said, we always like to see any program kick off with some sort of, planning strategic phase. And it's really important, particularly, to make sure that everyone agrees on what the goals, success metrics or success criteria are for that phase. Any given program is going to be split into phases. This is really the process you see on the slide is for any given phase. And then you always want to evaluate, as the last step on this slide indicates, before you roll on into the next phase. Usually phases are going to increase in scale over time and until you get a significant chunk of the portfolio pulled into the platform. So if we think of this as sort of a first phase to get us started, we're going to talk for about a week or two about getting that strategy nailed down. Another big consideration in that strategy phase is to determine the rollout schedule. So not just the time horizons, but which locations you're going to roll out. We often see one of two different strategies there, either by clustering things geographically to achieve some economies of scale. If there's any sort of site visits that are required, things of that nature, it helps to sort of do one region of the of the country at a time. Or we will see, particularly in early phases, targeting some of the stores that are maybe representative of the whole portfolio on a metric like energy use intensity, or even targeting some of the ones that are the worst offenders so that you can demonstrate what the potential ROI is. Once you've sort of figured out what you're doing, you're going to go into an integration phase for the live connected data that's usually getting some sort of gateway device out or some sort of internet routing mechanism to the cloud. Getting drivers applied to that will communicate with the underlying systems, and then figuring out all the data points and what you're pulling in. For that slower data, things like utility bills, maybe work orders, it's often a B2B integration project. Where we're essentially doing the same stuff, but just figuring out how to do it with, say, flat file or CSV file transfers, or maybe integrating via API to another system. Then you're going to move into platform configuration. This stage actually is the quickest, because if you're working with a competent provider or consultant that's installing the software, they will know how to implement that quite quickly once everything is worked out. And that's essentially just getting the software set up to organize all that data and make the screens that people want to look at. Increasingly, at least as far as Switch is concerned, we're moving into a managed service model after the project phase is complete. At that point, the fourth step, the project capital expense part of this is typically complete, and then you're going into actually doing something with the data. I'm going to talk in a subsequent slide a little bit more about some of the models we see that work for managed services and training. But the idea here is basically to get people skilled up, looking at this information, working out the business processes to utilize it, and then figuring out how to actually go affect change in the field. And then, of course, an evaluation period. The reason we show this taking 3 to 6 months is oftentimes you need to collect data over a period of time, do some things with it, prove out the business case and the model, and then come back and evaluate before scaling up for a next phase. So this slide I've presented on some of our other webinars for other real estate segments that we work with too. But it really is quite applicable to any multi-site retail portfolio in general. We've found that, generally speaking, there are 4 major categories that are applicable to any program for generating ROI. They're the ones you see as the 4 segments of that circle there. Reducing energy consumption and cost is often the most visible and one people think of the most clearly. Reducing high priority technician visits. This often involves altering a work order process or something to use the live data in particular to triage issues before technicians are routed to site. Reducing time to repair issues. Similarly, that is oftentimes working within a business process to measure and verify repair and maintenance technician visits, or to retro commission systems so that you clearly and quickly find existing maintenance deficiencies, things basically you need to go fix, and oftentimes using fault detection and diagnostics to do so. And then extending equipment life. This is primarily achieved by adjusting schedules and set points so that things aren't all over the place and they operate in a consistent manner that makes sense for the operating hours of the facility. And then, of course, that's going to result oftentimes in things setting back at night where they had not been before. And we run across that with a lot of our customers, pretty much everyone in some capacity. We'll have some portion of the buildings that are not setting back properly. There's 7 actual actions we'll typically take to do that. That's what's in the color. And you'll see that those actions, many of them affect multiple of these ROI categories. Something like retro commissioning the existing HVAC or refrigeration controls or EMSs will affect really 3 of those categories, if not all of them. Truthfully, at times that can actually reduce time to repair issues as well. All of these require the connected buildings platform or connected grocery platform to centrally coordinate. Some of them can actually be done through direct control, with the right platform. Others are going to require using data that is and centralized skills from personnel, an energy manager or an engineering team that you inject into an existing business process. In particular with grocery, Mike talked about this, there is a special value to submetering. Our director of engineering on our team, Dennis Krieger, and I were having a conversation last week, and he said to me that submetering may be the most oversold thing in the building technology space. And I think if you look just across the industry, that is probably true. There's a lot of companies that will sell submetering, detailed submetering in particular, that is going to have a limited payback at high capital costs. But in grocery, my opinion on this has completely changed through one of the programs we're doing with one of our grocery customers, where we really and truly are seeing some significant value through submetering. And in particular, doing anomaly analytics, where we are using the FDD portion of the switch platform in this case to find when we are when their locations are significantly over benchmark, and we've learned an enormous amount through doing that program and are finding a particular value in that. The key with the submetering, if it's something you're setting off on doing, is not to go too big picture or too granular with the installations. You want to shoot for sort of a tier 2 implementation, I call it, whereas tier 1 would be like the whole store, just one main account meter. Tier 3 would be like detailed circuit level submetering. You want to shoot for tier 2, which is really just trying to disaggregate the categories of spend. Usually the stores are going to be designed so that it's fairly straightforward with a small number of meters to isolate HVAC from refrigeration, from your dehumidification, from your lighting. And that's really where you can get a lot of the value here. So back to our 4 key performance indicators, we've actually, on a multi-site portfolio, had a significant amount of influence on some of these categories. This is with a different company that Mike was running through on in the main part of the webinar, but just some really significant savings. Keep in mind here with the energy consumption cost, any of these things where we're reducing something, some locations are better than others. Everything is a distribution here. So we're always looking at averages when you present summary metrics. This one particular customer saved about 11% overall. These were fairly small retail facilities, but it's a significant number when you add up the whole portfolio. We will consistently see 10 to 15% energy savings, even with just basic operational changes. Those numbers are without doing any capital upgrades whatsoever. When you take the capital upgrades that might come out of this over time, the number goes significantly up. So that 11% is just by doing things like streamlining HVAC set points, finding targeted maintenance issues with air side economizers, just standard sort of operational oversight, leading directly to that 11% savings. Reduction in work orders may sound like something that is a bit more far-fetched, but it is absolutely tangible. If you can adjust a basic facility management process to triage issues remotely, particularly with the mechanical systems, HVAC and refrigeration, you will see a significant amount of work orders avoided, of course, depending upon the process and how you run your facility management. But oftentimes these arrangements are outsourced through a fairly unsupervised work order management system. And the primary goal has always been to just get it fixed as quickly as possible. That's understandable, but with new data and new information, you can actually avoid a lot of emergency visits in particular, work things into the preventative maintenance schedule, and that actually brings costs down significantly. A thing to keep in mind there is that your FM provider, if you have that outsourced, which many do, is not necessarily going to like that depending on the nature of their contract. So you've got to think very carefully about vendor management here. That's often what you're doing, is vendor management. Extending the equipment life cycle is one that has consistently surprised me as our team has rolled out programs. You would honestly be surprised at how many things that should be turning off at night are not, and how many things that should be turning on at night, like parking lot light zones, are not turning on when they should. So just finding, say a 10 or 15% anomaly on that is going to result in significant extension of equipment life and significant energy cost reduction. Just lastly here, I know many people, that are listening in, many managers of these corporate real estate portfolios are going to think we don't really have the skill sets in-house to do this, but we might want to build it over time. What kind of models, work for this? And we totally understand this at Switch. What I've seen over the course of my consulting career and my time with Switch is 3 models work. Let me start with the one that doesn't. If a customer or organization does not want to train their own staff and does not want support from a service provider, that is unlikely to be a successful program. What that is building the technology for the technology's sake. And what you will find is that then you will have an added cost from the tech, and you will not necessarily be driving the ROI that you expect. So we like to stay away from those situations and encourage customers to move into one of the other models, A, B, or C. A is quite simple. Sometimes, particularly these larger corporate real estate portfolios, have an in-house team that is sophisticated, and they just need access to the data, and they need to be trained up on how to use the software. That's model A. That means your service provider, whether that's a group like Switch Engineering Services, our in-house team, or a consultant that's installing your platform, that group's involvement is the lowest to begin with and trails off quite quickly. It's essentially just training on the technology for the people who already have skills. Now, many organizations don't have the in-house resources to do that, and we've seen 2 models work well for that. Model B is a handoff model that essentially involves performing a managed service by the installing service provider or a consultant over time, transitioning those skill sets as budgets make themselves available to the in-house team, with a goal to ultimately get the service provider involvement down to the level you would for basic support, just like with the training model. But it's just going to take a little bit more time. The training involved from that service provider is often not just on the technology or the software, it's often on how to actually do the process of centralized data management, basically for facility operations. So it's training on what the managed service would be doing. The managed service model we are increasingly being asked to perform with our Switch team, and I believe I've read an article recently that was saying that a lot of the future of energy management is going to be driven by managed services. I tend to see some a strong case for that as well, based on my experience. And that managed service model is where the customer does not have a desire, or at least a goal right now, to build an in-house team. They will run that through a service provider, typically the installing group of the software, and the company doing the integrations, who has a nice base of knowledge about the portfolio once they're done with those projects. And they will perform a managed service over time that is essentially another outsource deal. The key there is that you of course still have to budget for that and be careful with the contracts, but you're going to have a service provider involved at a higher level over time.
Great, thanks, Aaron. That was really great. Now that we've covered the importance of going from an environment where systems are siloed to one where everything is integrated, we talked about real-world examples, and we covered the tangible steps getting a successful project off the ground. There's 3 things that we want to leave you with that you shouldn't overlook when considering a partner for a project like this. First is the ability to perform advanced fault detection and diagnostics and remote control. One is nice, but it's important to have a dual-edged sword. Digging into root cause from a platform is great, but you also want to be able to fix those problems from the same place. It needs to be easy to integrate, like Aaron was talking about. Make sure to ask your potential partner what their library of integrations are, because that can be a telltale sign if the process is going to be lengthy or not. and it's got to show results fast.
I just want to jump in on that one too and add that beyond just asking what the list of integrations are, be sure to ask a little bit deeper than that. What sort of information they're actually pulling from Johnson Controls. It's one thing to put the logo up there. It's another thing to actually be doing, deeper integrations than just one type of device.
Exactly. And again, read-write capabilities are going to be really important. And that's a control function. Can you write from a centralized place, or is it only going to be read only? And that's kind of that second layer deeper in that question. But these projects have to show value fast. You should be uncovering problems that can be monetized within a 2 to 6 month period, like Aaron was talking about, and getting these projects off the ground. Simple integration, fast path to scale and value. And then lastly, make sure you seek out a partner who has the skill sets to help you build a strategy, implement the project, train your team, and even be an extension of your team if needed. Aaron went into great depth there, talking about building the strategy up front, making sure all the stakeholders are bought in, going after intentional buildings or regional markets where you can deploy this very quickly and get results fast. To have somebody who has experience doing this, not only from the technology side, but the services side, such as switch managed services.